Ladies and gentlemen, Maidenslave here, and yes, I am going there. Today we are going to be talking about Metallica versus Megadeth, and this is going to be the beginning of a series that I would like to continue, depending on how well this video goes and how much I like it, as well as how much you guys like it. Now, I know what you guys are thinking automatically, probably even upon clicking on the thumbnail for this video. What is his personal bias? Because he has to have some sort of bias, you know, he likes Megadeth more, maybe he likes Metallica more, because we live in a dual society, at least in the Western Hemisphere. You know, Pepsi, Coke, Democratic, Republican, Metallica, Megadeth. So usually you have people on either side of the fence. And in a lot of cases, people will use good arguments, and in a lot more cases, people will use stupid arguments because they don't even know about the other band. I usually tend to be on the fence on this issue. In fact, whenever I'm talking to somebody and they defend one of the bands, I will automatically defend the other band. Anybody can come on camera and say, well, Metallica's better and Megadeth is gay, and that's how it goes because they sold more albums and stuff. But I've actually decided to split this up into categories. Each category will be worth 1 point. And there is about 10 categories. I tried to broaden them up as much as I possibly could, but there was at least one case in which I actually had to separate it. So the categories are vocals, rhythm guitars, lead/solo guitars, bass guitar, drums, musicianship/performance, which is how well the band plays together and, you know, how well they play live and just their overall musicianship. Success/influence, and that is how successful they are, which is, I guess, a technical fact of who is better, and the influence that they've had on metal and music in general. And then the last category is actually split up into subcategories. That is their catalogs, and I've decided to split it up into the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, including 2011 because Megadeth released 13. So, without further ado, let's just start this. Category 1 is the vocals. Now this is a pretty interesting subject because both bands have very similar situations, and both bands have singers that aren't technically that great. In fact, they both didn't want to sing in the beginning. They both tried to find real singers, but in the end they just decided that they would sing and play rhythm guitar. And in Dave Mustaine's case, he would also play lead. What you have is two singers that have found their own niches or however the fuck you want to say it. They both have their own individual styles, and they both definitely sound way different than any other singer that you're going to hear. And a lot of times you can poke fun at both of them, just their styles of singing. But for the most part, they both do a pretty good job at what they do. However, I do have to admit, at the end of the day, that James Hetfield is actually the more versatile singer. Over the span of his career, he has actually turned into a real vocalist, which is kind of funny because he started out as like a thrashy growler. Now, Dave Mustaine started out as a thrashy growler in the 90s. He started singing a lot better, but it seems like he has gotten back to the way he used to do things, which is not bad, but I'm just saying, at the end of the day, James Hetfield is actually a more versatile singer, and he seems to touch people. The next subject is the rhythm guitars, and this is one of the hardest and most debated subjects when it comes down to this whole versus, because both of these bands are notorious for their excellent rhythms, their excellent riffs. They're both big integral parts of the thrash scene. They were actually both they kind of both come from the same school of thought because they were all together at one point, at least Dave Mustaine with Metallica. And for me, you know, whenever I made a choice, like let's say I would pick Metallica, then I would think about some really, really good rhythm sections from Megadeth. So then I would say, okay, Megadeth, and then I would think about Master Puppets or Injustice for All, and then I would say, okay, Metallica. So for me, this is actually going to be the only tie on this list. So both of the bands get 1 point for this category. Next category is lead/solo guitars. Right off the bat, this actually isn't even a fair match because it's pretty much Kirk Hammett versus three of the greatest lead players in the genre and history. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it to Megadeth. Next category is the bass guitar. Definitely one of the hardest categories when it comes to these two bands. I probably spent more time on this than any other category on this list, because on one side you have Cliff Burton, who is one of the best bass players in rock history, and unfortunately his time in the band was cut short. He was only on 3 albums, but he really made a lot of noise on those first 3 albums. And a lot of people look at him as one of the greatest bass players of all time. He's also unique in the fact that he played with his fingers, which was really cool. He was just an out-there player. And then you have Jason Newsted, who was really good too, and his playing actually is a lot more similar to Dave Ellefson of Megadeth. And then you have, of course, Rob Trujillo, and he's a really good bass player too. And I believe there was only 2 different bass players in Megadeth, and most of the time they had Dave Ellefson. But in all reality, I really thought about Cliff Burton and Jason Newsted versus Dave Ellefson. That was what kept coming to mind. This is a very, very, very hard matchup. Cliff Burton and Jason Newsted versus Dave Ellefson. Initially, people are going to say, Cliff Burton, man, he's like the best bass player in thrash history. And that was my initial thought too. I was like, well, Cliff Burton, I mean, you got Orion, you got Call of Cthulhu, you got all this stuff. He's featured a lot. And then I started thinking about Dave Ellefson, who is actually also featured even more than Cliff Burton. Now, I know Cliff Burton has his solos, he has his sections, he has, you know, all this little features, but on every other song, he's just playing bass along with the guitar. He's not really doing much. And on any song that Dave Ellefson is playing, he comes up with some of the most wacky bass lines in the world, and they're always extremely audible. So at the end of the day, he has the really, really good solos along with the really, really good bass lines, which is also really important too. And Cliff has the really, really good solos. So at the end of the day, I'm actually going to give this one to Megadeth with Dave Ellefson. Now next we have the drums, and I know a lot of people are going to automatically say, well, he's going to give it to Megadeth. Lars sucks. But actually I had to think about this for a while, because I don't know if anybody remembers, but Lars was actually a really good drummer, and he was a really influential drummer in the, pretty much since they started to it, I would say the late 90s. He was an excellent drummer. However, very similar to the lead guitar / solo guitar, this really isn't fair, because Megadeth has had some of the best drummers in thrash history, rock history, metal history, of all time. Garth Samuelson alone is better than Lars Ulrich in my opinion. Nick Menza blows Lars Ulrich away, out of the water. So I actually had to give this category as well to Megadeth. Next we have musicianship / performance. This was really hard because, once again, Metallica used to perform at a very, very high level. On top of that, they have really, really good songs, and they play really, really good together. But the just out there music that Megadeth wrote and their performance of it, especially back in the day as well, is just out of this world. Dave Mustaine, back in the old days, had a very different philosophy than Metallica. Metallica had the philosophy of, well, we need to find people that are going to be easy to work with. They need to be talented, but they have to be easy to work with as well. Probably after the whole fiasco with Dave Mustaine. But Dave Mustaine back in the day had a completely different philosophy. He had this philosophy of, I need to find the best lead guitarist and drummer in rock, period. And he absolutely did it at least twice, arguably about 3 times in the entire span of his career. So I'm going to have to give this one by a hair to Megadeth. The next category is success / influence. And this is actually the only category on this list that has pretty much no opinion or any type of personal bias at all. It's actually a matter of fact that Metallica is far more successful than Megadeth, and they have a lot more influence on not only metal, thrash metal, but so many more forms of rock, it's ridiculous, and even on other forms of music as well, because they're such a big part of just pop culture now. Megadeth is highly respected in the metal world, in the thrash metal world, and the hard rock genre. Anything guitar, anything, very, very respected. A lot of people are influenced by them. Very successful band, one of the most successful bands that's been around for the last 30 years, but they are nothing compared to Metallica, and I always find it funny that a hardcore Megadeth fan just can't seem to get this. Like, you'll show it right in front of their face that the Black Album alone has sold more albums than Megadeth's entire catalog, and they'll just be like, no, that doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it is something that I have to mention, so obviously I'm going to give this one to Metallica. Now we get to the real part of this versus, the catalogs. So, the 1980s. Metallica produced arguably their best albums, the Holy Four, as some people call them: Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. In the 1980s, Megadeth released some really good albums as well: Killing Is My Business, Peace Sells, and So Far So Good So What. A lot of people will throw Rust in Peace in with their 1980s albums just because it had the same style of thrash, but in fact, Rust in Peace is a part of the 90s. So obviously I'm going to have to give this one to Metallica. Not only did they have more albums, but the level of music on those albums overall was better than Megadeth in the 1980s. So this one actually might be obvious. Metallica in the 90s produced the Black Album, Load and Reload, and Megadeth produced Rust in Peace, Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia, Cryptic Writings, and Risk. I'm going to have to, without a doubt, give this one to Megadeth. Not only, once again, did they, not only in this situation as well, did they produce more albums, but the level of music that they were producing was far more Now at this point, both bands took completely different paths in the 2000s. Megadeth kept going on the way that they were going before this, releasing albums fairly often. Metallica has taken a completely different approach, and they release an album an average of every 5 years since, I believe, Reload. So obviously the number of albums is way different once again in this decade. Metallica released Saint Anger and Death Magnetic. Megadeth released The World Needs a Hero, The System Has Failed, United Abominations, Endgame, and 13, including 2011. And to be completely and 100% honest with you guys, I'm actually going to have to give this one to Metallica. Now, before all the Megadeth people come out and say, are you fucking out of your mind? You're really going to have Metallica beat Megadeth in this decade? Megadeth released a bunch of consistent albums, and Metallica came out with Saint Anger and then Death Magnetic, which sucked too. Honestly, I'm going to have to agree with a lot of people that say that a lot of the music that Megadeth released in their later years is very forgettable. It just kind of turns into gray mush. It all kind of sounds the same at some point. Some of the albums that they released, I will admit, were very strong, but they're not very memorable. On the other side, you have Metallica, Saint Anger, the worst album of all time. Just forget about it. But I actually really enjoyed Death Magnetic. I thought it was a really good album, not just because they were trying to do what they did a long time ago, but just because I thought it was a really good album. It was very memorable to me. So I'm actually going to have to give this decade to Metallica. Now, after tallying up both bands, I have Metallica at 5 and Megadeth at 6. Not surprisingly, it was a very close match for completely different reasons. Before you make your responses, I want you to keep in mind that even with the categories and the numbers and all this stuff, at the end of the day, it is an opinion. And in my opinion, Megadeth is a little bit better than Metallica. Obviously, I'm going to want your guys' feedback. You can just straight up tell me what band you think is better, or you can use the categories that I used to determine who is better. You know, obviously there's going to be people out there that disagree with me. Try to be civil about it. And there's going to be people that agree with me. And maybe you'll agree with me, but for a completely different reason. Let me know that as well. I really try to be very objective about this, and I naturally am actually pretty objective about this subject. Contrary to popular belief, if you've seen some of my videos bashing Metallica, Believe it or not, there are videos out there where I bash Megadeth. Some people don't seem to understand that. Once again, getting back to the whole dual society, you have to pick one. I don't pick any of them. To me, they're both pretty consistent. They both have their very, very bad moments, and they both have their very, very good moments. They're both very, very important parts of history. And honestly, at the end of the day, in my head, both bands won anyways. It's just a fun little subject to talk about if you like music, if you like metal. So go ahead and let me know what you guys think, and don't let it get too crazy. So see you later.